started, so hopefully you've grabbed your sushi, and there's some more refreshments after the panel.
Great, thank you. So welcome, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territory of the West Coast Salish peoples, including Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam. And we've shifted a little bit our program, so I think Susan is going to begin, and then Daniel will follow with that, and then Deirdre and I are going to share some program components for the two programs that we had worked in developing, and then we'll hear from our panelists and our respondents.
So my name's Susan Ruzick, and I'm an Assistant Director of Social Justice Programs at the BC Teachers Federation, and my colleague Kathy Hartman is just in the corner there. And Gail Stromquist, as right beside Kathy, is the Assistant Director of Aboriginal Education Programs here. So on behalf of our departments and on behalf of the BC Teachers Federation, I'm so thrilled that you are here and that we're having this partnership to talk about social justice and indigeneity. One of our committees that we have here at the BC Teachers Federation is our Committee for Action on Social Justice. It's CASJ for short. And I'm going to turn it over to one of our members on CASJ, which is Daniel Hsu.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. As Susan mentioned, my name is Daniel Hsu, and I've had the privilege to be on this committee for the last 6 years, and sadly enough, my term will be up this year. And in the Social Justice Committee, there are 6 different action groups, and the one I'm involved in is the Anti-Racism Action Group. And in the back there, you could see from all the different action groups, various works that we've been doing, including posters and lesson plans and resource kits. We've also developed different workshops and so forth. So for us, for the anti-racism, the most recent things that we've been doing was to raise the red card to racism. So linking sports and racism together, trying to develop that kind of relationship and trying to address racism through sports, especially soccer. And other groups that are in the committee include anti-poverty, and they've been working on things like the living wage and looking at poverty issues, especially in BC, and it affect the children, of course, because they are at most risk in this province when it comes to the poverty rate. There's also the LGBTQ action group, and they've also been working hard in looking at anti-homophobia, looking at issues of sexual health, and they just recently have a new workshop based on that. There's also the status of women, and they have been working on, they've done a timeline of the progress of women throughout the century, as well as looking at violence against women. And one of the workshops is about looking at how do we address violence, and they're basically promoting a poster contest among students in this province about that. There's also the Environmental Justice Group, and they have other issues in terms of not just environment, but looking at issues such as water, and water as being a crisis, and also using bottles and so forth. There's also the Peace and Global Education group as well, promoting peace and looking at the effects of globalization. They have a conference coming up pretty soon this month, and looking at peace. And they have a guest speaker, a keynote speaker from the Gaza Strip, who's a doctor. And in the back there's more information about that. He'll talk about his experience as a doctor in that part of the region. And there is, I think that's it. I covered the 6. I hope I covered all the 6. Those are the major action groups. Again, at the back there, you'll find a lot of resources, and we've done a lot of work. And we are proud of what we do because we are a social justice union. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel.
So I'd like to also begin by acknowledging the BCTF, and in particular Susan Ruzick, Kathy Hartman, who's at the back, and Larry Kuhn, who's Larry Keane, who's actually in a meeting right now, but he's hoping to join us later, and Ann Field, and they've been incredibly supportive over the last several weeks, and just all of the details for today. So thank you to all of you, and also the Teacher Education Office, and Dr. Lori Miller is here from the Teacher Education Office, and she is a program coordinator for Student Services. And thank you so much for hosting our event as part of the Year of Teacher Education.
Thank you.
I would also like to point out that today is actually the launching of our research day in our department, which is Educational Studies. And so I just wanted to welcome our colleagues and graduate students from the department, and I also want to say thank you, Pam, Dr. Pam Ratner, our department head, who is here. And I think this is your second community event, at least that I'm aware of, third this week. So thank you for taking the time to come out to join us. I also noticed that there are several faculty advisors from the previous diversity cohort. Laura Redlin is at the back. Thanks, Laura, for coming in. And my co-coordinator, Hayne Way, is here as well. Thanks so much. Hayne's a grandfather of 3 now, so we don't bother him too much, but it's nice to see you here. So I think I'll just go right into sharing about, as I mentioned, Deirdre and I will begin by sharing about the 2 programs, the diversity cohort, which was a 2-year elementary program that I was involved in, and then Deirdre will talk about the humanities and social justice cohort. So with the diversity cohort, it was actually the first cohort in Western Canada at the elementary level that was fully dedicated to social justice and indigeneity and issues of equity. And I'll just go into what that meant. So we were looking at issues of anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-sexism, heterosexism, classism, disability, issues of ecological justice, indigeneity, Aboriginal education as part of every course in the program. So science was taught from a social justice perspective, math, and so on. So those were sort of the elements, and they weren't integrated. Our goal was always to make them a core component of those courses. And as I mentioned, Hayne Way and I coordinated the first diversity cohort in 2003 and 2005. And that's the experience I will really focus on in terms of how the cohort began. And it was co-created through a university committee, a university community advisory board. And so on that board, and that emerged out of the David Lamb Chair of Multicultural Education in the Faculty of Education, and that was Dr. Graham Chalmers, who was actually an art and social justice educator. And he and I worked very closely on developing the components of the actual program, but we did it in partnership with the advisory board that was made up of the members of the Faculty of Education, including teacher education, members across the university, including faculty from the history department, political science department, and the arts faculty, I should say. Those were all faculties. And of course the leadership team from the Vancouver School Board, and that included the associate superintendent at that time, Dr. Valerie Overgaard, as well as teacher leaders, and MJ was certainly part of that, and Laura. So we had teacher leaders, the district leadership team, and then we had activists from the community. So this advisory board was quite a comprehensive group of individuals that represented many different areas of society and this group actually was involved in all of the final decisions with regard to overseeing the overall structure of the program. And I would say to some extent the curricular content as well. And some of the goals of the program were to really begin to reconceptualize concepts of pedagogy and epistemology, to begin to understand our ethical responsibility in terms of social justice and indigeneity for us as educators, for the teacher candidates as new educators going into the program, for them to critically examine their own genealogies and also to challenge the status quo. So with those kinds of goals, I think what we had to ensure is that when they were going into the schools, those spaces were very safe and they were spaces where they would be well supported. So to that end, we had decided as an advisory board that we needed to have a selection process for the schools who would participate as part of the diversity cohort. So schools actually had to apply and be selected based on what they had done up to that point with regard to social justice and Indigenous education, and also what kind of a commitment they would have to a program such as the one we were offering. And that was to really ensure their commitment and the support that they would give the teacher candidates. We also decided that it would be very important to have a large number of teacher candidates in each school. So the tradition at that point was maybe to have 2 teacher candidates in each school, and so we had about 5 to 8 in all 5 of the diversity schools that were then selected. And again, that was to ensure that we had a critical community of educators and allies to support the kind of work that needed to be done. Because this is 10 years ago, and so although there's a lot of work to be done still in these areas, it was quite a different context even in the Vancouver School Board, which is probably more progressive than most other school boards in some of these areas. So I remember, just to give you an example of the context, I remember one school that we went to, and Hayne and Graham and others from the faculty, we went in together. And this was our first meeting with the administrative team as well as the teachers of the school who would be the school advisors. So we met with all of them. And when we met, the goal of our first meeting was to sort of develop some goals for the teacher candidates as well as the program at that particular school. So each school designed their own specific growth plans for the diversity cohort. And in that particular school, the principal started talking and he said, yes, so here we have, a lot of same-sex families. And there's some students at our school who are gay, and there's others who are lesbian. And so we really, there's a lot of, I know, shocking, but we were just in shock that the language was so difficult to even articulate for this particular school. And so that's how we started with this school. And by the end of it, just to give you some hope, by the end of it, there was the library had a full section on books that were that represented same-sex families as well as transgendered youth. They had probably about 10 to 15 workshops in this area, not only for the educators at the school, but also the wider community. And there was one other moment to remember. Oh, Prodi, and oh yes, and then we had a music. We had actually brought in the instructor who was part of the music program to work with some of the teachers in the school to kind of disrupt the heteronormative practices of music and dance classes and gym classes, where we're asking people to find a partner in the heterosexual music that we often hear in music classes and the songs that they learn. So those were some of the key components of that program at that school. And I think as I was reflecting on it, I thought, what this school actually wanted that was different than other schools, and the one that MJ was in, for example, is that they didn't actually want support with curricular content, which was what other schools really wanted, and they wanted to work together and really build some of those ideas and to build a community of critical scholars. I think for this school, it was really important for them to actually work with the university as well as the school district and the association to sort of receive moral support as well as institutional support for the kinds of changes that they were actually hoping for, because they were getting great resistance from the wider community in terms of some of the work that they wanted to do in anti-heterosexism. So that, I think, is really important for our work today, is how I think we could work together in some of those situations to bring institutional support, to bring program support, as well as curricular support and moral support and so on. So there's different ways, I think, that universities, school districts, and the associations can work together with these kinds of ideas of kind of disrupting some of the norms that are oppressive and often violent for students. So if you mention a few more components, or are we doing here?
1 minute.
Okay. So I'll just mention some of the other ones very quickly. Courses took place on site. That was another element that we had hoped for actually all our courses, but because of the way the program is structured at the university, that wasn't possible. And also, I think with the district's availability of space, it would not have been possible either. But Begbie School, where MJ was, luckily had offered us a room to use for the entire 2 years of our first cohort, and other cohorts that followed as well. And so I think being on site was really crucial, because when we were there, we could meaningfully actually work through and problematize theory and practice. So we had administrators and teachers actually join us for our classes at times. And one particular moment that I remember is we had some grade 2s from the school in Eastside, Vancouver, in our classes, and the entire school would stop each morning for what was called the Burdett's Music Listening Program, which was a listening program that the entire school listened to for 5 minutes a day, and it was all focused on Western European composers. And the school that we were in, the students were actually mostly Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, Filipino, South Asian, and so on. And so I remember that one particular day where the music was on and it was silent in our teacher candidates class, and I think they probably spent the entire 5 minutes reflecting on who the students were sitting in the room and the program, and how it did not represent or value their actual cultural backgrounds or the music of their culture. And so one of the activism projects, which was a requirement of the diversity cohort, each teacher had to research and then implement an activism project, as well as share it back with the community. So there's one particular group, what they decided to do was actually work together and connect with the various communities in the school, research some of the main composers from their backgrounds and cultures, and then create CDs at the time that could then be implemented and used alongside the program that existed at the school, to show that their own cultures and their own music was also of equal value, that you could stop an entire school for 5 minutes and listen to that. And I think the other area was accountability in terms of changing some of the forms and so on for the cohorts. For example, the teacher education, the lesson plan, so there was a required component for the teacher educators to actually show how they worked with issues of social equity in their classrooms, and how they evaluated from a framework of social justice as well. And in the teaching reports, equally, there was a paragraph where they had to highlight what the faculty advisors in the 13-week after the 13-week practicum, the faculty advisors had to highlight what the teacher candidates had done in terms of working in the areas of social justice and equity. And these are the forms that actually school districts would use to hire those candidates. So I've already talked about so I think many of these initiatives and program components, I'll stop there. We're really trying to raise awareness, create a critical community of individuals working in this area, so there would be greater support, and to mobilize that knowledge throughout at least those schools and the communities of those schools, but also the district, so begin to build on. After the initial year where we had 5 schools, the second year we had 10 diversity schools and so on. So it was really starting to work together, and at the end with the research, which we won't have time to go into, but the citations are in the back for both programs. One of the outcomes of the diversity cohort was the diversity team that the Vancouver School District has now to represent various areas of equity and social justice and Aboriginal education. So,
nice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. I may model sitting here. So many of the key components that Hartej described for the diversity cohort applied to the humanities and social justice teacher education program that was founded in 1998 and was in operation until 2005. It was one of the few, I think it was the very first at UBC that tried a cohort model at the secondary level, because things get a lot more complicated at the secondary level. And why we had humanities was that we had teacher candidates that wanted both to concentrate in English and social studies. So hence the humanities, but many of the same features that Hartej talked about applied. And I think I'm not going to go over those points, but I do want to point out that these smaller scale experiments are really important to show that positive change is possible. So as a result of both of these cohorts' experiences, we were able to feed some of that back into the process for revising UBC's teacher education program, and it was revised a couple of years ago to feature social justice not just in one or two courses but throughout. An Aboriginal education course was created that's 3 credits. We moved to an inquiry focus, and that was something that was very important in the humanities and social justice project. It looked a little different every year, but we had something that we called at the time a reflective inquiry, and we tried to link that to action and get beginning teachers to realize that the smallest decisions that they make matter. That you don't have to change the world in a year or whatever. That teachers are making important decisions every day in their classrooms and in their schools. And for them to start to think about themselves as policymakers and as activists in their community. So for this reason, it was very important for Hartej and I in kind of imagining this panel that we hear from voices of teachers. So we reached out to the alumni of our 2 cohorts. So I want to just say a bit about how the rest of the panel will be structured. We've invited 2 teachers from the humanities and social justice cohort and 2 people that participated with the diversity cohort. One was a student teacher and the other was a school advisor, which is a key role in teacher education. So we will introduce them. Each of the teachers will speak for 10 minutes, and on one of the slides that you can't see because it's in the back of the room, we just kind of summarize the questions that we pose to the teachers to think about, and we've encouraged them to tell some stories today, because stories are what stick with us, I think. And then we've invited 2 respondents, and we'll introduce them in a second as well. Just to take 5 minutes from their positions. Both of our respondents are very experienced educators and have worn different hats. So they'll kind of listen to what the 4 teachers share today and share some comments, and then Hartej and I will kind of wrap things up at the end. So that's kind of the format that we had envisioned for the rest of the panel. So I think that okay. So we're going to introduce people not in the order that they'll speak, which is a little bit confusing, but that's okay. So I want to introduce first of all Harkiran Aulick. Harkiran was in the 3rd cohort of the Humanities and Social Justice program. So she was at UBC in 2000 to 2001. She currently teaches at John Oliver Secondary, and she's been there for about 8 years. She teaches English 8 to 12, and for 3 years has taught Social Justice 12, which is a course that's near and dear to many of our hearts. She sponsors a social justice club called Eyes of Hope. I like that name.
We came up with it.
It's loosely connected to Free the Children, but also does work with a variety of other organizations in Vancouver. And through those connections, Harkiran has worked with students in taking them on volunteers to Kenya during the spring break of 2012 and Ecuador in the summer of 2013, where the students learned about issues that the communities face and how Free the Children is working with them. I believe they also had a chance to work on building a school to learn about the culture, history, and daily life of people in the communities by working, eating, and interacting with people in those communities. So you'll hear from Harkiran in a minute. The next person that I want to introduce is Chris Lakakis. Chris was in the second cohort of the Humanities and Social Justice, so he was at UBC 1999 to 2000. Chris is the head teacher at Fraser Park Secondary for the Burnaby School District, which is part of his program, I think, is part of the Provincial Resources Program. Fraser Park Secondary is housed within the Burnaby Youth Custody Centre, and its student body is made up of youth from across BC who are remanded or sentenced to time in custody for criminal acts. Chris has taught there for 12 years as the English teacher, counselor, and now he's the head teacher. Chris's passion is creating positive attachments and opportunities for success for students who are marginalized and who've not had the chance to experience success in school. Chris is also the father of 3 children, including 2 identical twins, 2 boys at 15 months, so and I believe a daughter who's
no, 5-year-old son.
A son who's 5, and he is counting down the years to a full night's sleep.
Okay. It'll take a while. Having a 4-year-old, a few years. I'd like to introduce Cassandra Richter, who's sitting right beside Deirdre. Welcome, Cassandra. Cassandra teaches in both the French and English programs in the upper intermediate grades because she really enjoys where students are in their lives at this level when they're beginning to question and formulate their opinions. Cassandra mentions that she has lived most of her life feeling like she was living in someone else's culture. As a result, she is particularly attuned to people living with what she calls the isms. She has always felt herself to be a bridge between communities, in particular Aboriginal community with others. And I've known Cassandra not only in the diversity cohort, but also through the North Van School District. The last school that I was a vice principal at, Cassandra had just left. And so and everybody wanted her back. And so she shows she is somebody who is a really well-respected leader in Aboriginal education in the district. So thank you so much, Cassandra, for being here. And at the very end, right beside Chris, hello, this is Dr. MJ Moran, who teaches grade 6-7 class at Begbie Elementary School in East Vancouver. She is a well-known teacher who will speak up for, hold up, and push forward the ideas of equity and social justice. She states that these ideals are not standalone items easily explained or separated from her, but are the cloth of who she is, therefore the weave of what she teaches. I had a chance to work very closely, as I've already mentioned, with MJ in the diversity cohort, and she was one of the most dedicated school advisors and took very much a leadership role during those years along with her colleagues at Begbie School, which again was one of the most dedicated schools who worked very hard with us in really pushing some of the boundaries that were quite challenging at the time. So it's wonderful to be able to reconnect after about 10 years now. And I also want to acknowledge and take this opportunity to acknowledge Dr. Moran, who has just received and physically just received her honorable mention for the 2014 UBC Faculty of Education Alumni Award. So congratulations, MJ, very well deserved. So I believe Cassandra.
Okay. Osiam, my name is Tusho Squab. My parents are Greta Hurst and Hans Richter. My Tsleil-Waututh parents were Anne and Joe Thomas. Hoichachwa for being on the traditional unceded and ancestral territory of the West Coast Salish peoples. I am a teacher, a mother, and a woman with a learning disability, an athlete, and someone who descends from many heritages. I was part of the 2003-2005 diversity cohort. The work of this cohort had an important impact on me, It was crucial in helping to validate so many of my experiences with regard to the marginalization of Aboriginal peoples, peoples with disabilities, non-heterosexual people, and generally people who don't conform, for whatever reason, to the status quo. As I felt safe in this space, it was the first time that I ever publicly discussed my learning difficulty. I chose to apply to the diversity cohort because of the goal and focus of the cohort spoke to me. I wanted to be able to speak about the challenges faced by Aboriginal students, as well as many other marginalized students. By that time, I'd been working in North Vancouver since 1997 as a First Nations worker and later as an SEA in the feeder high school. I already knew some of the challenges and the systemic oppression that students of color, Aboriginal students, and students with learning difficulties faced. This is when I came to witness how First Nations students experience the education system in North Vancouver. Education is about so much more than the planned curriculum. The students I was working with already faced many more challenges than just getting classwork and homework done and succeeding in school. The legacy of colonialism has had lifelong effects on them from the moment before their birth, and the larger mainstream population is impacted negatively as well, whether they recognize it or not. As I wrote my sharing for today, I was in a children's play area where my son was having fun. I looked up from the table I was working at and noticed that a young Caucasian boy was staring down two First Nations boys that were off to the side sharing drinks with each other. They were all in approximately grade 5 or 6. These oppressive attitudes begin at a young age and carry on from there, and I believe that it is education that can change this, but not just any kind of education. It must be critical education like what we experienced in the diversity cohort, where issues of racism, sexism, heterosexism, classism, disability, colonialism, shame, especially with regard to Aboriginal education, were explicitly brought into the curriculum with all their tensions, discomforts, and with the many challenging and messy moments. Moments that I remember for their ability to start to change thinking and to develop critical consciousness amongst my peers, as well as many of our school advisors, administrators, and other school community members, all of who attended our classes and events. One of these moments was during a discussion that took place in one of our courses that was held at Sir Matthew Begbie Elementary. The school name was problematic for obvious reasons. As part of this discussion, we tried to imagine ourselves as Aboriginal people walking into this school daily. We wondered how many of the parents knew that Sir Matthew Begbie was a former judge known to have hung an Indian chief as well as at least 12 other natives. If the parents did know the reputation of this hanging judge, we wondered if they had had the opportunity to send their children elsewhere, or if they were simply had to accept that this was the catchment they were in and ignore the violence of the school name. Even to this day, Begbie's reputation is questioned by those writing his biography and history. What is said about him cannot be proven since it wasn't documented. This is the history that is written in print and on the internet, and worse, in our educational resources. Other than Aboriginal Education 12, for example, most of our curriculum continues to be exclusive to the European point of view. The oral history of our elders and ancestors isn't real history, after all, as it is invalidated by it not being documented. My experience in the diversity cohort taught me the importance of bringing controversial issues such as these into my classroom. Many students and even teachers still don't know about the residential schools or the Indian Act, the legislation that was brought in to beat the Indian out of the child in hopes of making her or him assimilate into mainstream white settler society and become civilized. Both my mom and dad attended residential school. they were told directly and indirectly on a daily basis that they would never amount to anything. If some surpassed this expectation, it was not without extreme obstacles and violence. Every time I consider making students aware of these institutional silences, when I talk outside of the box, outside of the textbook, when I ask someone from the local nation to speak about a current issue and to talk about what they've learned from their elders, I worry about being called on for not teaching the mainstream curriculum or not maintaining the status quo. Since I can pass for white, I think I get to speak a little longer, but it's just a matter of time. If I was someone who was racialized, I think my time would have come up already. It is troubling that I worry about this as part of the work that I do of being a teacher, an Aboriginal teacher. I don't know that many teachers who feel comfortable bringing Aboriginal content into the classroom, and often when they do, it is either tokenistic or appropriating or outright dismissive. Sometimes it seems easier to ignore all the injustices and silences so that we wouldn't be angry all the time, but of course that is not a choice, not for me nor my people. Having this kind of choice would be a privilege, and many unfortunately do have it and exercise it daily at a great cost to others, especially marginalized Aboriginal others and their communities. Having worked in the school system now for 17 years, I have come to realize, even more so than when I was in the diversity cohort, that there is a great need for professional development and the raising of awareness amongst educators and administrators, especially with regard to the histories and needs of Aboriginal students. But I don't think that the one-off professional days are the way to go anymore. We need more sustained ways of doing this work. For example, we have many district leadership teams that North Vancouver is known for worldwide. But I wonder when the time will come when we might actually have a district Aboriginal leadership team where representatives from every school would be provided release time to gain leadership in Aboriginal education and awareness, and then be able to take these learnings back to their schools. Providing these kinds of resources and leadership would highlight the value that districts place on Aboriginal education, not only for Aboriginal youth, but for all the youth, and disrupt the tokenism that I have come to know with regard to what is often called the Aboriginal issue. Thank you. All my relations.
Thank you very much, Cassandra, for your sharing. Harkiran?
When I entered the social justice cohort, I was young. I had gone straight from high school, done my undergrad, jumped right into education. I had no idea about anything. And now when I look back, I laugh at who I was then. It was nice to be in that cohort, although I embarrassingly will say I did not choose it. I fell into it. I was having a hard time registering for my courses. There was a code, you punched it in, you got all your courses. And we actually did an exercise and we were sharing something, and another student mentioned something similar and how they'd fallen into it. And somebody, I don't know if it was Deirdre or
Probably
Gabby,
was me.
pounced and was like, "What, you didn't choose it? Why didn't you?" So I kept my mouth shut because I was embarrassed to say that I had. But I don't regret it in any way, shape, or form. And if anything, it was better that I hadn't chosen it because I walked in without any preconceived notions. I didn't have an agenda. I was young and open to learn, and really had no clue. One of my first sort of aha moments, which we were asked to discuss, was, again, being young and naive. It was early in the fall, and we were just meeting with possible schools and placements where we might be for our practicums. There was a strange tension in the room, and didn't really understand why. And there was, we were discussing amongst ourselves. And then later we heard that there was resistance to bringing in social justice focused students into these schools, and that whether it was administration or other teachers, the resistance. And again, being young, I just couldn't understand why. It didn't make any sense to me because this was education and we're teaching students. And so what if we focus a little bit longer on residential schools, or have a story that happens to have a gay student or a gay character in it? What's the big deal? I really couldn't fathom why there would be such resistance. And I understand there's fear of change, and that was a part of it. But again, it just felt that this was obvious, and it was obvious education to represent the students and what was happening in our society around us. And then when we were in education, luckily the school that I was in was very welcoming, but I knew of other cohort members who didn't have the same experience and did have to push often against their sponsors to just teach some of what was in the textbooks and some of what we were required to do research for and bring in, being a part of the social justice cohort. So that was eye-opening because, you know, as a student going through high school and everything else, you trust. You trust your teachers, you trust the administration, you trust the curriculum, you think these are educated people, and that's your job. They're supposed to teach you all the things that you don't know. And that was one thing the social justice cohort did for me, was to open my eyes to the fact of what are we teaching and what aren't we teaching, and who is providing this information for us and the resources in the curriculum, and why isn't everyone included, and why aren't all these different issues just something that's a fact rather than something that's hushed and talked about quietly, or just a little box on the side in the textbook. The other aha moment I had was an activity we were doing. I don't even remember what the activity was, but we were told to choose 5 descriptors, 5 words to describe ourselves and why. So you're sitting there and you're wondering what adjectives I was going to use, and I ended up, the only 2 I remember, Indo-Canadian and woman. And as everyone kind of went around sharing their ideas and expressing why, I realized that those 2 were very important to me, regardless of my interests and other things that make up who I am. And those are the only 2 that have really stuck with me. And again, it was the beginning of me starting to realize who I am, and that these are 2 aspects of who I am and how I view the world and how I interact with the world and how other people interact with me because of these things. And again, being young, just kind of going, oh, wow, that's right, this is who I am, and maybe I'm treated differently, or maybe I see the world differently, good or bad, doesn't matter, because of who I am. And that is actually an activity now I use in my classroom, with stories that I teach in and around identity, and getting the students to journal. Pick 5 words that describe you, why and how do you use these, how do you see that changing, why are they important to you, and in the same way that the social justice cohort did for me, to just get them to open their eyes a little bit, to be aware of who they are and their place in this world, and how the world interacts with them. So that's one way I bring it into my classroom. Another way is just every day. My brain is constantly attuned, and I'm sure all of you who are teachers are the same, to noticing things that you can bring into your classroom. How can I teach about this? Oh, that'd be a great resource. And so mine more so is towards social justice issues, whether it's something I see in the news or a movie I'm watching, it's constantly attuned to it. The posters on my walls, whether I have, and that was something that was suggested, was get calendars and laminate them in their posters. And so whether they're Adbusters, calendars, posters that I've put up, or others, just covering my walls with things. So while the students sit there, and you know, they will space out, they do get bored. Yeah, at least when they do that, as engaging as I am, that they'll have something to think about, and just kind of look at as they, you know, try to refocus themselves to what you're teaching them. And then generally it's everything. That's what I've learned. It's everything that I do. It's who I am, and it's my passion. And what I choose to teach, and the stories that I teach, because I mostly teach English, the novels that I teach, bringing the social justice into everything, talking about current events, talking about my own experiences and things that I have come across, or, you know, in my past, in my family's past, and bringing that to the students. John Oliver, one of the reasons I've stayed at John Oliver all these years has been because of the population there, a large Indo-Canadian population, and feeling that in many ways the responsibility of me being a role model for the students there. I coach soccer and I coach other sports, and I tried my hardest to coach boys there just to show them that women can do this. So in everything that I do, it just comes out into what I teach, and I know that it's paid off in different ways. About 6-7 years ago, a grade 9 student of mine came to me, and she said she'd been reading some stuff, and the issue of child soldiers really bothered her, and she wanted to do something about it. And so we threw together something. It was the end of the year, but that followed up the next year, and this club, Eyes of Hope, began. And they named it, and it was student run, and it was her friends, and it was their passions, and it was them bringing in different people to speak. And from that, it grew. To one point, we had about 60 members, and this is extracurricular. It's not for marks. They're giving up their own time to do this, and it was their passion. And I realized that my interests were flowing on and rubbing off onto them. And we've raised, whether it's money or awareness, for so many varieties of groups in school and charities around the world and within our community. And for example, one of the students just finished a campaign we collected over 20,000 pencils that are then going to be distributed through Plan Canada for schools in Africa. And these are just little things that and it's student driven. They find stuff that they're interested in, they bring it to me, and then I help them take action with it. And so through that was what led to these 2 trips to both Kenya and Ecuador. It was student driven. We fundraised together. It cost a lot, but they really wanted to do it. And for Kenya, it was over a year of fundraising that we did. So it really took commitment, and it was a small group of students that went, and they really got to get their hands dirty, and it changed them. I've done a fair amount of traveling since finishing the education core and getting my experience in the world, but they learned so much, not just, collecting money and raising awareness within the school, but actually getting their hands dirty, meeting people, and experiencing the world from a different point of view, not as a tourist. We were in a rural community, interacting directly with the people. And then just this past summer, at the end of August, we went to Ecuador. We're in the Amazon. And again, one of the things that really challenges them, I also have a fear of bugs, and there are tarantulas right there with us. And all of us doing this together. And that was one of the things, and I think it was mentioned as well, how we interact with the students and building those connections with them, and them seeing that, they're not the only ones that are afraid, that this is not strange or new to any of them, that we're doing it together. So that's been life-changing for me, and I've seen it change for them. Many of them have graduated, and there are a couple of them actually at UBC, what they decide, what they want to focus on, what they want to major in, whether they're taking courses that are social justice focused, or one of them wanting to go into international relations now, and really understanding that that is something that is a passion of hers. Another way that it's been an impact within the school is the social justice course itself, Social Justice 12. Again, I didn't bring it about, it was students. It was one girl in particular, being very much interested in it, gathering her friends, doing the research, going to administration and all the committees and everything else to make that course happen at our school. And I was lucky enough to be the teacher for it. And it's really changed the school. And again, I believe that it was me and several other teachers as well, bringing in social justice into everything that we do, which leads to some of the challenges that we face, or that I've faced. One is resources. Getting current, relevant, interesting resources that students can access, that's interesting to them, that they can understand, that's relevant to their lives, whether it's in English, and the stories and poems and the books that we read, or in social justice, finding stuff that they can relate to and understand. I'm not the most tech-savvy person, and I find it difficult finding these resources for students. Another challenge has been apathy or indifference and ignorance. Among students, last year I didn't have a social justice course. We couldn't get enough kids to sign up for it. They didn't know what it meant. They didn't know what the course was. And this year I had 2 classes because I learned my lesson and I promoted and promoted and promoted, which is another challenge. I wish I didn't have to. I wish I didn't have to get out there and do a whole show and really go to all the classrooms and talk to the teachers that I know that will allow me to come in and really promote the course. I wish it could be in our everyday teaching. And the other thing along with promotion is generally, I was allowed or able to do everything that I was doing without any worry, without anyone kind of looking over my shoulder. Which was nice, but we also didn't necessarily get a lot of recognition for what was being done and the growth that these students were experiencing, unless something good happened. So one of our students won an award. And at We Day, televised and everything else, she got to stand on stage and receive an award. And then suddenly administration was coming around and noticing us, or other teachers were noticing us. And I couldn't but help shake my head and just say, we've been doing this for such a long time, and now that you can use us as a promotional tool, now that it makes everybody look good, now you're going to show it. And along with the ignorance and the apathy, it's frustrating getting recognition or getting support, and it's disappointing. You know, the basketball team is getting much more support, or the push for technology is getting much more support, and we're put on the back burner often. And it's this fine line where I want to protect the students from feeling that disappointment, but I also want them to understand the realities, that this is what happens. Face resistance, just like we did in the social justice cohort. And so that leads to how we could be supported. One is resources, access to, and the other is, I really don't think it should be a course or a teacher in the school teaching this. Anything social justice comes up in the school that has nothing to do with me. It's plunked into my box in the office. I get the email, I get the phone call, because, oh yeah, she teaches the social justice stuff. Oh, she has a club that does that. And it's terrible. It really should be somehow integrated into everything we do, because it is life. These are things they're going to face in everyday life, and that's why they love it. They're curious, they want to know, just like I did in social justice. Walking into that cohort, I was open, wanting to learn, wanting to experience, and so are they. And so when you integrate it into everything that they do, all around them, the passion grows within them, and then they walk out those doors, and social justice is not just a neat little book that they can throw out because they've graduated or they've written a test and it goes away. It's a part of their everyday life and how they see the world, how they interact with the world, and what they do with the world. And I found that to be the most effective way, is to bring it into everything I do and who I am, because it is who I am, because of who I am and how I interact with the world. And I think that's one way that we could bring it in for our students. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much for Karen. Chris.
Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional unceded territory of the West Coast Salish people and thank them for allowing us to be here and share our stories. Every time, when I saw the first the flyer, the invitation for this, I saw a panel and it had our names on the panel, and it immediately got my heart going about job interviews and different panels that have been part of. And seeing all of you there with notepads, and it just came right back. And it actually, tell me a time you made a poor choice and how you turned it into a positive is always seems ones that it gets asked. Trying to find a weakness yet restated in a different way. I actually use that as a bit of my metaphor of my teaching career in social justice, and if you bear with me, I'll explain. In order to understand, you'll have to understand my personal history, my social history, and how I came into this field. I was born and raised in Vancouver, and I'm 36 years old. 36 years old. I don't know why I'm looking at my notes. I should know that. My parents came from Greece in 1968 and did not come with much. And through a lot of hard work, we were able to set up a home. And through long hours, my dad worked and my mom stayed at home. And my brother and I were very fortunate to have everything we ever needed. And part of that being a quality education, which they were not afforded. So they worked really hard to send us to some excellent schools. The long story short is that we had a sheltered life, and later on I didn't know about a lot of the inequities or inequality that was happening for many people in our society. So my decision to enter this cohort was I knew about it. It wasn't an accident. I didn't know much about it. I just had read about it, and I think it's Teleridge you were talking about. But what happened was I knew about it. I could have done this regular humanities cohort, the English and socials, or I could be part of the secondary social justice humanities cohort. I thought that sounded better on a resume, and with my interest, I did enter it. I am very thankful that I did, as you had said, I did enter it with an open mind, and because of that, I think I'm very thankful that it was the lens that I entered my teaching career with, not only for teaching, but for teaching for social justice. It was very eye-opening. So let's fast forward a couple of years. I am currently the head teacher at Fraser Park Secondary, and it is in the Youth Custody Center. I have been there 12 years. I think had I not taken this this program or this course, this cohort program, I would not have ended up in that field. I started as the English teacher and then counselor, and now in my capacity as head teacher, I am able to help push forward programs or initiatives because I'm non-enrolling. The driving force behind my love of my profession is that educators that I am able to spend time with students and have a positive effect on their lives. True for most teachers, but when that happens in our school in a custody center, it usually can be life-changing for the student. The majority of our students come to us with school or life experience of being marginalized, feeling powerless or lacking an identity or a voice in their schooling, or that their histories have reinforced the idea that they must expect trauma or violence. Our aim in teaching for social justice is aimed at deconstructing these ideas by focusing on the positive. In order to do so, we have moved away from a punitive model and focused on a restorative one throughout the center. Our approach to teaching is on a focus on creating positive, contributing, and democratic citizens in our society. The vehicle we use to promote this positive theme has been through utilizing Dr. Martin Brokenleg's Circle of Courage, and specifically empowering our students to deconstruct their past experience and grow from them. The 4 key tenets are belonging. In addressing the issue of being marginalized, we try and create students into welcoming, safe, and comfortable and caring classrooms where everybody's needs are respected. Through the use of mastery, where students are given opportunities to experience success in school and build on those successes. In doing so, we are building up their identity and the confidence to challenge and express themselves. Through independence, a custody center is in itself a negative place to try and promote independence. But in teaching for social justice, we must create opportunities for students to explore their interests and celebrate their histories through personalizing their education via a shoulder-to-shoulder approach. An example is the use of independent directed studies. We had a student who had an interest in Aboriginal hand drumming. Through that independent directed studies, IDS, we created Aboriginal hand drumming 11 course. He connected with a local elder. He was able to teach and to incorporate a group of students who were not Aboriginal, and they shared their skills at the change of season feast. So the assessment piece was that change of season feast, and it was connecting both culture and the school in a positive way. And finally, generosity, which ties into teaching students to be democratic citizens, provide opportunities to demonstrate acts of generosity and unselfishness, make a positive contribution to another human life, and for students to give back. Now, going back to the panel and reflecting on making a poor choice and how did you turn it into a positive, my other example is also an aha moment. I was lucky enough to attend the UBC short course last year and was in a session on embedding the Aboriginal curriculum into our teaching practice. Everyone was encouraged to introduce themselves and tell a short story about them, and so that we could understand the lens through which everyone was viewing society. And I knew that it was to introduce the effect of residential schools and how people were forced to see school. Some people were forced to see school. But for whatever reason, when I came to my turn, I said, my name's Chris, and I was born and raised in Kitts. It's the heart of Greek land. And I immediately was able to erase hundreds of years of history just with that short comment. I realized that my comment about being born and raised in Greektown was erasing history, and that in a blink of an eye, I didn't mention that it was named after Chief August Jack Catalano from the Squamish Nation, or how that land was actually taken away. That was a huge eye-opener and aha moment for me also. It it allowed me to focus and reflect on who I'm teaching, or refresh the idea of who I'm teaching for myself, because after a while in the classroom you do get into a routine, and it allowed me to reinvigorate my practice. It started discussions with staff and to look at who we're teaching and how we are teaching. And to give you an idea of, we started with a campaign and a project, and it has continued. We wanted to see who we were teaching, so we looked at the research and the data of our students, and of the youth who are placed in custody, 47% identify as Aboriginal from the McCreary Society report. That's a very alarming statistic, because only 3 to 4% make up the national population in Canada. According to the McCreary report, 2 of the risk factors that are shared by Aboriginal youth in custody are lack of connectedness to school and their culture. So our hope as a staff was to address these issues. We identified the challenge and became advocates for the inclusion of the Aboriginal culture and history into the school's curriculum across every subject. We proposed that the school must alter the somewhat tokenistic and standalone delivery of Aboriginal curriculum, because it goes against the fundamental goals of creating attachments to school for all learners. Our staff's professional development had helped create the vision of how to successfully create a sense of belonging and pride in our Aboriginal students, and the strategies to address issues of the past together, shoulder to shoulder, in order to move forward as a society. The project was based on the tenets that as a staff we value respect, trust, and relationships, and through effective communication and inclusion, a power with and transformative approach in acting in the best interest of the student. Improving the curriculum delivery of Aboriginal education at Fraser Park was motivated by these core values as we built positive relationships with our students, and through the celebration of the Aboriginal culture as we integrated it in our grade 8 through 12 curriculum. So it's a work in progress as it's been going on, but examples, we moved away from, like I said, the standalone assignments to the cross-curricular delivery, where the woodwork teacher would start a project on Aboriginal hand drum for any of our students as just part of the regular curriculum. That math teacher would help the student create the dimensions for the project. The science teacher would go over, and the social teacher would go over the symbolism and of the hide and the stories behind it with the English teacher, and it just became I guess embedded through the fabric of our curriculum. And so we've had a great success, and the biggest success stories have been when students are able to share what normally in terms of teachable moments, when it's a teachable moment for we expect a class for the students to be the ones to get the moment, but it was where the teachers got the moment, because students were able to share from seagrass basket making ceremony how they had done it with their grandmothers and how important it was to their grandmothers, and teaching other kids in the class what that meant and how excited it was that it was the first time that they were able to connect with some of the curriculum that they were dealing with. So it's not over, so it's a work in progress, and if I can hopefully come back another time and report on some of the good stories. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chris. MJ?
Thank you. Wow. I feel honored to sit at this panel. Thank you. I have to say to start with that I feel very lucky. And my luck has to do with being a teacher. And it stems from, I'm still actually getting over the death of my mother. And I think about that all the time, even though it's been over a year now. But when I circle lucky, that's what I think about the most, and how she taught me things, and how everybody said that. Anyways, I wanted to start with that, because when anybody asks me anything, it's I love my job, passionate about work. I'm so lucky to be in a classroom every day with children who teach me all the time. And it comes back at me, because I feel that way, they feel that way, and it grows. And it could be the children that are in my class today. It could be the student teacher that I happen to run into. It could be the parent that comes into my class to ask me a question, who then I thank for having such wonderful children, who then they thank, and it just keeps growing from that. So that's like my most important one. And I like coming back to that, and I like being in a place where I hear that over and over again from other people. Then I'm going to go to the people that have already spoken and talk about things that are connected, because I really didn't plan anything. I figured I'd just bounce off of everybody, which I knew that you would tell me things that would lead me in the right direction. So if I start with Cassandra, I agree. Controversy happens in the classroom all the time. It's my life. If it doesn't happen in the classroom, then it didn't really happen because somebody brought it into me, and it just grows. And people ask me all the time how I cover everything I cover, because I do regular curriculum, and I do WE Day, and I do UNICEF, and I do the badminton team, and I'm the chair of this, and I'm the head teacher at that, and full-time teach. And you just do it because that's how life is. And if you don't face it when it comes to you, it's not, that's how it goes. So yes, controversy in the classroom all the time. And Harkin, trust. Everybody needs to trust, agreed. And if I can't be in a relationship with the children that I'm with and they can't trust me, then there's no way. If I can't trust that they're going to do something and believe it, then they're not going to trust me and believe it and go forward as well. And I agree. The whole opening your eyes, and that everyone needs to open their eyes and see what other people see, not just what you see from your own perspective. And I don't think that happens when you're, and then that only happens when you're an adult. I think it happens any day ever, as long as someone believes that you can do that. So when if I take that and I go back to when I was doing my doctorate, one of the most important things I figured out was that I teach people. The people I teach happen to be 11, 12, and 13, but they're people. And I don't see them as being 11, 12, and 13, and I tell them that. I see them as being the doctor that's going to treat me when I'm older, or the person that might be collecting my garbage, or the person who I need to help me with my car, or the lawyer, or whatever. So when I'm working with someone that's 12 and that's having a problem figuring out how to dribble a basketball, I imagine that person might potentially be the person that fixes my eyes when I'm 90, right? And so that was a big aha. And when I take that, as I continued with it, I also realized that the adults I work with are also people, because I have infinite patience for the children I work with, but sometimes I don't have infinite patience for the adults that I work with. So I need to remind myself that the adults are people as well. So trust in everyone. And Chris, two things that you said really spoke to me. One of them was that everyone's needs are met. And when we originally started, the group of us met last week and started talking so that we could get to know each other a little bit, and everyone was talking about indigeneity. And I don't have a lot of that conversation in my school because there's not a lot of, it comes up in conversation in that it's part of my curriculum, and when I face it, we talk about it, but it's not a regular conversation. So I was trying to figure out how I would fit and what I could say could add. And I think what it is that anytime you come across anything, you have to meet the person that's there. So any particular day in my classroom, something comes up that I didn't realize because I hadn't asked the right question, and then the right question gets asked, and then we meet that. Right? So I don't necessarily plan to put that in my curriculum, but I plan to meet it when it faces me and come up with it. And relationship, 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 relationship. Basically, everything comes down to a relationship when I think about teaching. And an another aha moment I had was when I was doing my doctorate. Actually, no, when I was doing my master's, and we were asked to find out why we teach. And we had to ask why we teach. And then we had to go to our school and ask 3 people at our school why they started teaching. And my assumption was that everyone started teaching because of the same reasons I did. And when I found out that other people started teaching because, there was 3 jobs available for women at the time, secretary, teacher, and nurse, and she didn't like blood and she didn't like typing, so she ended up teaching. It's like, wow, whoa. And another person chose to teach because they had a choice between teaching and I think research, and they didn't really like studying, so they chose teaching. And that's not everybody wasn't like that, but that was a definite moment where I thought, I have to actually consider, you don't want to do this because of the same reasons I do, so therefore you're not going to have the same outcome, the reasons I do. How do I do it all? Activism project, that was Hartej. So when you were talking about the diversity cohort and the activism project, that when I have student teachers, which I have lots of them, I've been teaching for, I think this is my 22nd year in my same school, which is another reason why I feel very lucky. I've had 15 student teachers, and each of the student teachers, when they come, the first thing I ask them to think about within the week is, what's your passion? And what are you going to do a project with our class with by the end of the term? So yes, we're going to help you learn how to do, how to teach math, and yes, we're going to help you learn how to teach social studies, and yes, we're going to talk about all the isms, but you need to come up with something by the end of the term that you're going to lead the whole class in, that I'm going to learn how to do, because you're the master. You're going to teach me something, and I'm going to learn from it, and all the kids are going to learn from it, because everybody comes with a passion. So the activism project spoke directly to that, and I was very happy with that, with the diversity cohort. And if we talk about why we got the diversity cohort, as a teacher in a school that was one of the founding schools in terms of the classroom was, the cohort was taught in one of the classrooms at our school, I actually encouraged the principal to choose that cohort to have at our school. So I seeked it out, sought it out. Sought it out, there we go, I sought it out. And so to have it come to our school and to have the conversation continue was just amazing. And to watch the student teachers interacting with the children in the school on a daily basis, whether they were student teachers from our school or from other schools and coming to the classroom, that was amazing. And in terms of things that I would ask of, or things that I would encourage people to do to continue in this path, is to find people like like-minded peer. I'm fortunate enough to have Dr. Jeannie Kerr in the room, supporting me in my conversation here, and she's somebody who I found while I was in my doctorate, she was in her master's, and we met in a course, and we realized that even though we're not in the same school, we had like-minded things that we could help each other through. And when you're in a school situation, sometimes it's very challenging to move forward, because it feels like you're being held down. And not like you're being held down, that someone's physically holding you there, but you don't get encouraged. And if you don't get encouraged, it doesn't make you feel like you're doing something positive. And so the way to do that is to go out into the greater community and find other people that are like-minded, because there are lots of other people that are like-minded out there, as you can tell. I'm lucky enough to sit with some of them here. But if you don't have them with you, it makes it a lot harder. And I found sometimes at schools, if you do something that you don't necessarily do to make other people feel bad, but it does because they think they should be doing what you're doing, it comes out in a negative way from them. And so even though they want to encourage you, they don't know how to, because it makes them look bad because they're not doing it. And even though you have no expectation that they will, that you just want to move yourself forward and move the students forward, that can be problematic if you don't have other people to help you with that. So like-minded peer, not like-minded fear. Everybody's got enough of their own fears. Classroom controversy, how do I cover it all? Last night, as I was at an alumni event, Dr. Gordon Smith was talking, and he was talking about passion as well. And he was talking about that teaching, you don't think of things between 9 and 3, because between 9 and 3 you're teaching. And what you're thinking about is how you're going to get everybody to the next place that they need to get to. Your teaching is, in the middle of the night when you wake up and go, oh, that's how that problem is going to be solved. Or you're doing something and you have a conversation and you realize that, oh, that's how that's going to be solved because I just saw someone else do it. So it's not something that you just do and then walk away from. It's always with you. And if I could have a dream job, which is, I remember being asked this at the end of my dissertation, if you could do anything you wanted, what would you do? It's never going to happen, but let's just dream for a while. I would actually, I love teaching grade 6 and 7. Love. They're amazing. You give them something to think about, they think about it, and they come back the next day and they're like, wow, and you're like, wow, yeah. And they'll email me and ask me questions, but at the same time, it's quite, it would be lovely to have other people, like, say, teacher candidates, or university professors, or the dean of education, or the superintendent of schools, or I don't know, Minister of Education, come and see what an amazing classroom I have and that we run together, and be able to do things that not only was I in my classroom working with my students, but that we could be an experimental classroom. We could show other people what's possible. I don't know how many people ask me, well, how do you get that done? Well, come on down. I'll have one of the kids explain it to you. An open house this week when kids spent, an hour and a half with a grandmother speaking in Cantonese and explaining how to add and subtract fractions using a number line. You sitting there, it's amazing to see how that would work, and it would be great if other people could see that. So dream job, work for the university and the ministry and the school board all at the same time. Yes, and that's what I have to say.
Thank you, MJ. Okay. We're going to now introduce the two respondents, and should we go with you first, Susan?
Susan, how are you doing for time? It's about 2 minutes. 6, I know you have.
Oh, I better go first.
Maybe I'll just talk about who you are for a second. So you've already met Susan Ruzek, and she works as the Assistant Director of Social Justice Programs here at the BCTF. She is an elementary teacher from the Coquitlam School District, so we have about 4 districts on this panel, which is great. Susan is the past president of the Peace and Global Education, PSA, and she has sat on the Committee for Action on Social Justice and was a social justice workshop facilitator for many years. She continues on various community organizations to advocate for social justice for all, and those of us who have worked with Susan will be able to attest to her gift for negotiating very tense situations of inequity and her deep commitment to social justice, peace, and human rights. So thank you for joining us today.
Well, I have to say I'm really blown away by the 4 panelists and the talk about your teaching. I mean, what you are doing is what we want teachers to be doing. I'm a colleague as well, but right now in my role, I am assisting teachers, from all levels. There's teachers that aren't really sure what social justice means, to teachers such as yourselves that have integrated in the classroom and are living and breathing social justice. So I was looking at this from an angle like, how do we help the rest of our colleagues? Because ultimately, that's what, in order to have a better world, that's what we need to do, is to help our colleagues do what you're doing. So some of the things that we have available here at the BC Teachers Federation, we have numerous social justice and Aboriginal education workshops that are free of charge. And we will come to your schools on a Pro D Day or after school to discuss any number of issues that is needed to be discussed. I was circling, as each person was talking, I was doing similar to you, MJ, I was circling some of your questions, which are really deep and important, and I think we need to keep pondering these. For example, who are we teaching and how are we teaching? This needs to be integrated. This is life and they are interested in it. What are we teaching and what are we not teaching? We need to disrupt tokenism, the institutional silences, just such powerful questions in examining our own power and privilege. And as was alluded to, that some of us just went into the profession never ever questioning this, and how do we begin to do this? we have here at the BC Teachers Federation, we use a social justice lens that we hope teachers will move through to get to solidarity action, which is systemic change and breaking down those barriers. I just want to acknowledge that two of the authors of this social justice lens are in the audience, Roz Johns and Louise Gonzalez, who are past members of our Committee for Action on Social Justice. And I think this is a powerful way to help teachers move through access, making sure that everything is open and accessible to all. I'm not sure if we always think about that when we're teaching, and giving students agency to change and teaching them the advocacy to change, and then moving to solidarity action so that we can start breaking down these barriers. Because there is, unfortunately, I know this program started 10 years ago, but there's still huge barriers, institutional barriers, that we need to be aware of in our own power and privilege, and how we can disrupt this. So short-term solutions are needed, because sometimes that's what gets teachers interested and they're passionate, and we do need to address short-term issues, but we also need to address the long-term policy decisions as well. We need to be myth busters. There's lots of myths out there, and questioning them, questioning textbooks, questioning all sorts of things. And activism can occur at all times. The simple things in your school, you see something that's not right, your students probably know all about it, and you can help guide them to start activism, even in small ways. School fees, playground issues, books, especially textbooks. We need to make sure all our students are represented and feel like they are a part of the school, that their face is in the school. I'll just end that I think we really need to question how our students' inequities informs the way that they experience us in their world. And how are we helping them to experience the world in a positive and safe way? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Susan, and I know you have to jet out of here. I would like to introduce Christine Stewart. Chris is from the Ganada tribe of the Nisga'a Nation. She's worked in many capacities related to education, including as a child care worker, First Nations school support worker, an administrative staff person for Aboriginal education in the Professional and Social Issues Division of the BCTF. As a union representative, she's a mother of two and currently a Vancouver secondary teacher. It's nice that Chris is going last, because you've worked, she's taught at both SFU and UBC, and has served as a faculty associate for SFU, so you've been a teacher as well as a teacher educator. And you've also written about Aboriginal peoples, especially around questions of education, so thank you.
Great, thanks. So before I begin, I just want to say that my traditional name is Gelksa Gibaik Sok, and I just want to also acknowledge that we're on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, on whose land that I get to live, work, and play. And I also want to thank Hartej, Daniel, Deirdre, Kathy Hartman, Susan, Larry Keane, Ann Field, Lori Miller, Pam Rutner, Gail Stromquist, Hayne Way, Laura Rudland, and all of you who have stayed well past 6. After probably, I'm sure, working all day. And I just before I say a bit about what I do or what keeps me here, is I want to acknowledge the work that my colleagues do. Cassandra, something that resonated with me and what you shared with us is the reverence and ceremony for our children and our communities that all of us need to see in our schools. Susan's already brought up that we have workshops in the Federation, and I'd hook up with Gail Stromquist if I were you, any of you in this room. You know, and Harkiran, I wanted to say that, you know, for me, what resonated for me and what you talked about was how all children absorb what we do or what we don't do. And that you remind me that social justice is not charity, and that it's something that we live and breathe in all of what we do in our classrooms and our daily lives. And Chris, what resonated for me was a sense of belonging. And I understand the broken leg work, but I think that what you do and where you are positioned in your school, it's so important to all of our children to have a sense of belonging. And the fact that you're open to working with your students to create that space for them, it's probably the first time they've ever had that, so I really treasure that's happening. And MJ, your love and passion for teaching, and your story about how, well, it's not your story, it's about how you live, and you're telling us that it starts with a caring adult, and in your experience it's with your mom. And while you miss her dearly, she is with you always. And I just wanted to say that you know, that she's here right now. I also want to say that, you know, teaching, you know, something that you brought up for me around why are you a teacher? And, you know, when I first started teaching, people asked me that. And when I went to teacher ed, people had, you know, talked about the chalkboards, they played teacher when they were little. And you know, and mine wasn't that. Like, mine was for political reasons. It was for political reasons that I became a teacher, and to interrupt the status quo. And while I admired my colleagues who were talking about why they became teachers, and it was you know, they like to play teacher, like play house. I was curious about that, about what that was for them, and so we struggled to see each other through teacher ed, and it was a really hard program and class that I was in. I was with Dr. June Bainan at SFU, and we did the PDP program. And it was called the diversity module. And Hayne, you remember, I mean, you probably remember that. We had you come in as a guest. I worked with Sandy Berman, Eric Wong, and worked with the Queen's Harbor. I don't know if you remember that. The Vancouver School Board did the Queen's Harbor, where you did this, it wasn't experimental, but you did sort of these assimilated or simulations of discrimination, and that's how I got through school, you know, being an actor in one of those programs. Anyhow, it helped subsidize me. One thing I was thinking about how the work within our organization, within the BC Teachers Federation, you know, for me, it happened, I think, around 1997. And I think Larry, I don't know if he's still here, but he really helped catapult for us, Aboriginal teachers, these policies, and worked, and lots of coalition and teacher viewpoint people who had an orientation for, you know, struggling with anti-racism, and who were struggling with what's not happening for Aboriginal students in BC public schools, what's not happening. And so a number of us Aboriginal teachers brought this forward, and and found some common place, and it was in social justice that we found space. And for me, my undergrad degree is in feminist studies, so it's in women's studies and psychology. And that was a place that I found a refuge or some safety where I could work through being a racialized woman, a mom, Indigenous, and it was quite a journey, and it still is. What happened in 1999, it was at an annual general meeting where there was a year of research where teachers across the province were trying to answer what was going on or not happening for Aboriginal teachers. You can still go online. BCTF still has these recommendations on the website, and they're quite amazing. And one of those recommendations was that we have a full-time staff person. So Merle Williams was the first staff person. I was the second one. Marjorie Dumont was the third one, and now Gail Stromquist is the fourth one. And they're 4-year terms, and they're temporary. And so each of us, our classroom, came out of the classroom to work on something for ourselves, that is passionate to us. When I came on, employment equity enhancement agreements were the ones that I worked with. That was my passion or my place to help troubleshoot that with my colleagues. We still have I think we have probably about, we still have work to do. We have probably about 200, and that's a generous guess, of Aboriginal teachers in the public system. And we've probably got about, I think, 58 to 59,000 self-identified Aboriginal students in the public system. I'm not talking band schools, I'm talking about just your regular schools that we all are teaching in. In order to get some parity, we'd need at least 3,000 self-identified Aboriginal teachers in the system. We don't have that yet. We're working on it, and each school, each district with their local teacher union, because it's in our collective agreement now to set this up, are responsible to bargain that locally and to hire this language is for new teachers, new Aboriginal teachers. And there's only probably of our 60 locals, or 61 teacher locals, we've probably got about maybe 8 that are in negotiation, working on that. Vancouver's one of them, but we got a long way to go even within Vancouver. Because now what's happening is this is where the rubber really hits the road, which is around seniority, right? And trying to struggle with how are we going to create spaces for hiring of Aboriginal teachers to teach everything, not just be an enhancement worker teacher to only provide culture and not so much language in the urban areas, but to be just teaching cultural support. We have, we have curriculum that has been developed over the years, and we hear often from teachers, well, we don't know how to teach this, we don't know what to do, and there's a lot of fear about what to do. And for 1 year, I taught in elementary of my long time teaching, and I loved it. It was so different. We had to do everything. I was shocked because I'm secondary, and I was shocked at how much I know people teased me all the time about that. But yeah, but I had to learn how to do music. I had to learn how to do art. I had to learn how to do this, and we even did an all candidates meeting where the kids, the students actually for teacher trustees elections. And this is when the first time Green Party got in. And I believe it was because of the work we did. Like these kids they were shocked at the election prior to. So for me as a teacher, both in secondary and elementary, it's really about creating advocacy and about providing the the truth-telling or the tools for students to make change in their lives, no matter how young or how long they've been on the planet. The other thing I just will wanted to say is I think what's, all of what I've learned around advocacy for all. I mean, I also have one of my kids is she's autistic and she's special needs, and there was never she's 21 now. She just turned 21 last week, and we've had to struggle like from day one getting supports and getting services for her, and we had so for me it's all about the benefits. I was hoping I wasn't going to get this. I thought, okay, I'm going to finish now. Not that I wasn't going to get it, but that I just want to say one of the questions for me that I always ask is who benefits and who's not here, who's missing from this space, and what am I doing or not doing to create safe space? And if I'm struggling with it, like I try to find like-minded people where I can be upset about it, about needing even to create space, because there's sometimes I think the privilege that I wield in all of this is sometimes it's problematic. But anyway, I just think it's around who benefits. I think those are questions that I ask myself, and I think that's what this cohort does, is what you're doing, and I really admire the work you're doing and the courage that you're doing, and that you're creating this for adults to go out there and struggle and be warriors for children and BC public education, because we need you. And our unions. I love our unions, so go to your union.
Thank you so much, Chris. That's great. Originally, we had me slated to make some comments. I'm not going to do that because you brought it together beautifully, and MJ also spoke about the importance of like-minded peers. So what we kind of see this event as partly about is collaboration and taking collective responsibility for teacher education, and a teacher education that's sensitive to issues of social justice and indigeneity. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank the panel, and Lori Miller's going to help us with some gifts, and I'm going to turn that over to you. Do you want to?
The gifts?
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe I'll just say a quick thank you very briefly so we can mingle. But one of the things I actually realized that is, I started talking about the resistance that led us to some of this work, and I realized in all your talks that you actually continue to talk about the resistance that you face. So I just want to thank you not only for being here today, but for the courage to keep going when you keep facing that kind of resistance and the kind of work that you're doing, which is so crucial, as Chris has already mentioned, for these areas, and Deirdre as well, of social justice and Indigenous education. We couldn't do it without all of you, and I know that there are many like-minded people here in the room, and we're hoping this last part, right after the gifts, you will stay. We've got a little bit more food at the back. Please stay, mingle, connect, and we hope we'll continue to have more conversations in this way. So thank you all for being part of our panel today.
So these are small gifts from as we celebrate the year of teacher education, and this is one of the many events that we have held. And this one is a joint event with the Teacher Education Office and the Social Justice cohort. So I'm going to go down.
You want me to hand them out?
Goes down to Chris.
Okay.
These are a little bit different.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I can do. These are for the panelists. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. If anybody took photos, you can all always tweet them with the hashtag.